The night was cold. Not just the kind of cold that bites at your skin and makes your teeth chatter, but a deep, gnawing kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. Mist curled like fingers along the cobblestones, clinging to the edges of broken buildings, slipping between the cracks in walls, whispering secrets of a world that had no place for someone like Lira. She huddled under the remnants of a wooden bridge, one of the few shelters left standing after the last storm, her knees pressed to her chest, arms wrapped tight around herself. The smell of wet earth and rotting leaves filled her nose, but she hardly noticed. The mist smelled like everything she had ever lost. At 19, most girls her age would have been dreaming of freedom, of love, of belonging. Lyra's world offered none of that. She had been born without a wolf, a defect in a world that valued strength, lineage, and bite. From the moment she took her first breath, the world had whispered her worthlessness. Half-blood, wolfless, trash, shadow rat. Those were the names they called her, the echoes of ridicule that followed her like vultures circling carrion. Even her own reflection refused to offer solace. In the cold glass of cracked windows she saw nothing but someone invisible, someone who was never meant to be seen. Her mother had died when Lira was very small, a sickness that no healer could cure. Rumor had it that the child, Lira herself, carried some sort of curse, some flaw that had poisoned her mother from the womb. She had lived ever since with that shadow over her heart, a silent reminder that love was dangerous, life was cruel, and the world had no place for those who did not fit the mold. Yet even without belonging she had learned to survive. Dawn broke reluctantly over the city and she crawled from under the bridge, pulling her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders. Her stomach twisted, emptiness gnawing at her. Hunger was a constant companion, but hunger was not her greatest fear. Fear was the people. The children who would throw stones, the pack guards who kicked dirt on her blanket, the merchants who spat when she begged for scraps. Fear was the knowledge that no matter what she did, no one would ever see her, would ever care for her. Her mornings were spent scavenging. Market stalls offered forgotten leftovers, discarded bones, the brittle crust of bread that had hardened overnight. Every step she took was calculated, careful not to draw attention, careful not to fail. And when she could, when someone would fall or scrape a hand or cut themselves on sharp metal, she would kneel quietly at their side, her hands glowing faintly blue, and pull the pain from their bodies. She had never admitted it to anyone, she couldn't. They would call her a witch, a demon, a cursed child. But it was the only power she had, and she clung to it as if it were life itself. The process drained her, left her gasping, trembling, and yet, every life she could mend reminded her that she had value even if no one else saw it. The world around her was merciless. She had no family, no prospects, no rights. She had learned to walk in the shadows, to avoid the sharp eyes of those who would hurt her for no reason at all. And still, even in her most careful movements, humiliation found her. A guard would kick dirt across her sleeping mat. Children would throw stones and chant, "Wolfless, wolfless." And she would shrink further into herself, a small, trembling thing, as if she could disappear entirely and the world would not notice. It was on one such morning, the mist still heavy and the air damp with the scent of earth and decay, that she heard it, the rumor. Whispers in the wind, carried by market women and street hawkers, murmurs she would not have believed if she hadn't heard them with her own ears. The Northern Alpha King is dying. He's poisoned. No one can save him. The name struck her like a physical blow. Finn, the Alpha King. Strong, commanding, untouchable. A figure who had commanded armies, who had walked through the courts in packs with the authority of someone born to rule, now falling helpless at the mercy of a poison that none could reverse. Lyra's heart twisted in a strange, painful way. For the first time she felt the smallest flicker of hope, curiosity, a dangerous, sharp spark of longing that she could not place. Her voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the dripping mist and the distant clatter of the city waking up. If someone like him can die, what chance do I have? The question was not about him. It was about her. About the fragile thread of her existence, stretched thin across a world that had never wanted her. And yet, in that fleeting thought there was a seed, a spark that would not be denied. Somewhere deep within her, buried beneath years of rejection, fear, and pain, something stirred. Something small, trembling, but alive. And as the morning mist began to thin, as the first rays of sunlight struggled to pierce the gray clouds, she took a shaky breath and made a silent decision. He would not, could not, remain invisible forever. Not if a king untouchable and feared, could lie helpless and dying. Not if the world had decided she had no place in it. Not when the faint glow of her hands reminded her that she carried something no one else possessed, something powerful, something dangerous, something capable of changing a life. Lira did not yet know the path she would walk, did not yet know the trials that awaited her, the betrayal that would test her, the choices that would demand she give more than she ever thought possible. But in that moment, standing alone on the edge of the mist-shrouded market, a small, trembling Omega girl with hands that glimmered faintly like moonlight, she felt the first pulse of destiny against her chest. The world had looked away from her for 19 long years. The world had whispered her worthless, invisible, and doomed. But fate, it seemed, had finally found her. And Ethan, the dying Alpha King, would unknowingly become the reason she would step out of the shadows. This was the hook. This was the call. The rest of her life, the life she had never believed she deserved, was waiting just beyond the veil of fear, waiting to challenge her, to break her, to bind her in ways she could not yet imagine. And somewhere in the depth of that cold, cruel world, Lira whispered again to herself, trembling, aware that the world would never be the same after this day. If someone like him can die, maybe, just maybe, I can do something no one believes I can. The mist swirled around her like a cloak, the market hummed with life and cruelty, and the first beat of a story that would shatter hearts, heal wounds, and test the very limits of love began to stir in the air. The sun had barely pierced the gray horizon when the accusation came. Lira had been gathering herbs at the edge of the marketplace, small, ordinary leaves meant to soothe bruises and cuts, herbs she had found discarded or left behind by careless healers. It was all she could manage, simple things, nothing more. But it was enough to draw attention, enough to ignite suspicion. They say you stole from the healers, a sharp voice spat. It belonged to a beta with a face like carved stone, eyes cold as winter frost. Lira froze. She knew every whisper, every rumor in this place had the weight of a blade. The market fell silent around her, the usual morning chaos vanishing as all eyes focused on her. She could feel it, the gazes pressing against her back, judging her, already condemning her. I didn't, she whispered, voice trembling but earnest. The words barely left her lips before they were drowned out by the laughter of others, cruel and sharp, designed to wound before words could. No, of course you didn't, the beta sneered, circling her like a predator. You're nothing but a wolfless child. What could you possibly know about anything that matters? And with that, the healers grabbed her arms. Strong hands, unyielding, pulling her into a tight, humiliating grip. Lira struggled, but it was useless. She was small, frail, invisible in the eyes of the world, and no one would intervene for her. The crowd began to gather, drawn by the spectacle, drawn by the chance to witness the downfall of someone they had always seen as worthless. Wolfless. Wolfless. Shadow rat. The children cried, pelting her with stones that bounced harmlessly off her thin cloak but struck her pride, her very sense of being. Each word burned deeper than any cut. Each stone was a reminder of a life where she had always been cast aside. She fell to her knees in the dirt, arms raised instinctively to shield herself from the onslaught. But no one came to help. No one ever did. The humiliation was deliberate, ceremonial almost. The healers dragged her to the center of the packed square, a wide expanse of stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and cruelty. Here she was exposed, a small, trembling figure standing against the open sky, powerless, insignificant, a target for every jeering voice. A bucket of cold mud was tipped over her head, the brown sludge pouring into her hair, dripping into her eyes, filling her mouth with the taste of earth and rejection. She gagged, choking, and the crowd erupted into laughter, delighted by her disgrace. She shook, but the mud clung, heavy, suffocating, marking her like a brand for all to see. And then the beta struck. A sharp slap across her face, hand ringing against her cheek. Lying thief, wolfless. You think you can hide anything here? The words stung more than the physical blow, each syllable slicing into her already frayed self-worth. And then came the betrayal. Her eyes searched the crowd desperately for a familiar face, a friendly one, anyone who might step forward. There across the square stood a boy from the bakery where she sometimes begged scraps. They had shared smiles in the past, fleeting moments of kindness in a world that had none for her. His eyes met hers just for a heartbeat and she thought maybe he will help. But he didn't. He looked away. Pretended not to know her. He swallowed, hands tightening on the edge of the bread stall, and stepped back into the crowd. Fear had silenced him just as it had silenced everyone else. Lyra's heart broke in a way that no mud, no slap, no insult could ever achieve. It was a sharp, piercing loneliness, the betrayal of someone who had once been a friend, someone who had given her hope, now snatched away in the cold light of day. Then came the voice of authority. The Pack Council. Deep, unyielding, ancient, and terrifying. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet as their words fell. Serve as a cleaning slave for the castle, or leave the territory and die alone. The choice was a knife pressed to her chest. Both options promised pain, both threatened her existence. The castle, the northern castle where the Alpha King lay poisoned and dying, was a place of unknowns. Dangerous, intimidating, frightening beyond imagination. But to leave meant certain death. Hunger, exposure, predators, rejection. Alone. And so she chose the castle, not out of hope but because it was the lesser of two torments. Her small hand trembled as she brushed mud from her face. She did not know what awaited her there. She did not know that the very air she would breathe, the halls she would walk, the people she would serve, would challenge every fear she had ever held, every wound she had carried, every secret she had buried. But she stepped forward, pulling her thin cloak tighter, each step heavy with fear and resignation, yet also a flicker of determination. The journey to the castle was neither short nor gentle. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then in thick cold sheets that soaked through her clothes and made her shiver. Thunder rolled across the distant mountains, a growl from the heavens that seemed to echo the tension inside her chest. She clutched the straps of the cart that carried her, knuckles white, heart hammering, and felt as though the storm itself conspired with the world against her. Darkness surrounded her on all sides, the night and the rain and the unknown. She could not see the end of the road, could not see what awaited her beyond the gates of the castle. And yet she felt it. That spark, small and fragile but unyielding, from the moment she had heard Ethan's name whispered in fear and awe. The Alpha King, the ruler of the northern packs, lying helpless and poisoned. Somewhere inside her, deep and secret, her hands tingled, glowing faintly blue even through her soaked sleeves, as though the storm and the night had called forth a part of her she barely understood. A part that just might matter. She tried not to imagine what lay behind the massive stone gates of the castle. She tried not to imagine the Alpha himself, the man whose life hung by a thread, whose presence could command armies, whose power filled the land, and whose gaze alone could terrify even the strongest wolf. And yet she could not help herself. Every step, every drop of rain, every clap of thunder seemed to pull her closer to that inevitability, that intersection of destiny and despair. The cart jolted over uneven stones. Her body tensed. The wind whipped against her face, carrying with it the scent of iron and wet stone and the faint tang of something alive. Her pulse quickened. The castle loomed ahead, jagged and imposing, its towers cutting into the gray sky like claws. She swallowed, cold and afraid, but somehow compelled, drawn toward it as though an invisible thread tied her to the fate waiting within its walls. He had no reason to hope. No right to hope. She was a beggar, a shadow rat, a girl the world had ignored for 19 long years. And yet something whispered to her beneath the roar of thunder, beneath the hiss of the storm. She was about to step into a world that would demand everything she had. Not just her hands, not just her courage, not just her survival, but her heart. And in that moment, as the first gates of the northern castle rose before her, dark and unyielding against the storm, Lira understood something she had never allowed herself to believe before. The world might not have seen her, might not have cared for her, might have tried to erase her from existence entirely, but destiny had not. The castle doors swung open. The guards looked down at her with indifference, perhaps amusement, perhaps disdain. But she would meet them, all of them, with the quiet fire that had never left her. She would face the storm. She would face the darkness. She would face Ethan. Thunder split the sky again, rain sluicing down her face and soaking her cloak, and somewhere in that moment, Lira made a silent, trembling vow: she would not fail. She did not yet know what failure would look like, but she knew that whatever awaited her inside, she would meet it. Because for the first time she understood that stepping into the nightmare might be the only way to find herself. And so she stepped forward. The northern castle awaited. The dying Alpha King waited. And the path that would shatter her, bind her, and awaken a power she barely understood had begun. The hallway outside the northern castle's inner chambers stretched like a tunnel into darkness. Flickering torchlight painted shadows along the stone walls, and the air smelled of damp stone, melted wax and something else. Something metallic that made Lira's stomach tighten. Her hands clutched the mop she had been assigned to, knuckles white, fingers trembling. The mop was old, strings frayed, soaking in water that dripped onto the cold floor. It was a simple task, meaningless to anyone who had power or status, yet in this castle even cleaning could be dangerous. A sudden cough shattered the quiet. Lira froze, water sloshing from her mop bucket, and instinctively her head tilted toward the sound. Then she heard it, the wet, ragged sound of blood hitting stone. Her heart lurched, a cold hammering inside her chest. Her breath caught. It was human and it was close. So close. The sound vibrated through the corridor and her body reacted before her mind could reason. Lyra's hands tingled, the faint blue glow she always tried to hide flaring imperceptibly beneath her skin. She shook, panicked but drawn irresistibly forward. Healing. She didn't know why, but the pull was immediate, a magnetic force of instinct she could not ignore. The air around her seemed charged, every nerve ending humming with tension. As she rounded the corner toward the chamber, the door cracked open slightly and she caught her first glimpse of him. Ethan. The Alpha King. The man whose name had echoed in fear and awe throughout her entire life, now lying sprawled across the floor, coughing violently, blood streaking the stones beneath him. The sight should have terrified her. It should have sent her running, shrieking into the storm outside. But it did not. Her wolfless soul trembled, small and insignificant, yet drawn with a force she did not understand. The urge to touch, to pull away the poison, to ease the suffering, it was overwhelming, unbearable, undeniable. She took a cautious step forward, then another, until the cold stone bit at her knees, and she found herself kneeling beside him, hands hovering, unsure if she was allowed, unsure if she dared. And then their eyes met. Ethan's eyes, piercing and sharp, locked onto hers, and for the first time, Lira felt the weight of a wolf she had never known. The growl came from him, low and guttural, instinctual, a warning she could feel in the air around them. Her omega scent had been detected. Guards appeared as if from nowhere, pushing and shoving, their faces tight with anger, confusion, fear, but the Alpha King did not look at them. He looked only at her. Something stirred inside him, a whisper of curiosity, of recognition. His wolf shifted, hesitant, confused. "Why," he murmured, voice rough with pain and command, "does my wolf go silent when she's near?" The words struck her like a blow. Her breath caught. She trembled, every instinct screaming at her to kneel, to apologize, to vanish entirely, but she could not move, could not tear her gaze away. The air was thick with power imbalance. She, the shadow child of the streets, the Omega Beggar, trembling with fear and awe. He, the Alpha King, powerful, poisoned, commanding armies even as his body betrayed him, staring at her with a mixture of pain and fascination. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she whispered, voice shaking. Her knees hit the cold stone. Her forehead bowed instinctively, hands hovering, trembling over his chest. "I didn't mean to disturb." Every word was laced with terror, humility, and the faintest hint of a desperate hope she did not dare acknowledge. The guards hissed at her, shoving her back, attempting to separate her from the Alpha's presence, but Ethan's hand twitched, a weak, ragged motion against the floor, and his voice, barely above a whisper, carried with a weight that silenced the room. "Leave her. Let her touch me." Time froze. Rain against the castle windows became distant, a dull roar. The torch flames flickered violently, shadows dancing and stretching across the walls. Lyra's heart thundered in her chest, hands aching to obey, fingers aching to reach him, yet the guards held her back, their strength formidable, their eyes wide with confusion and alarm. And then, as if the world had paused for the sake of destiny, Ethan collapsed entirely. His body hit the cold stone with a sound that tore through her chest, and she lunged forward instinctively, the glow beneath her skin intensifying, trembling, begging to release, to heal, to save. The guard's hands were like iron, pulling her back, restraining her, and she screamed, not a sound meant to frighten, but a raw, ragged cry born of fear, love, and desperate helplessness. But even in the chaos, Ethan's voice carried over the din, rasping, commanding, fragile, and yet resolute. "Let her touch me." And then darkness. The world went black. The torchlight, the rain, the pain, the fear, all disappeared into nothing. And in that moment, Lira understood something she had never allowed herself to believe. She was no longer invisible. He mattered. Her hands, her strange, hidden power, her presence. They had drawn the attention of someone the entire world revered and feared. Yet the truth of it terrified her more than it thrilled her. She did not know if she would succeed. She did not know if she could save him, or if stepping closer meant risking her life entirely. She only knew that the dying Alpha King, the man whose voice had commanded packs and kingdoms, had chosen her. And that choice, fragile, whispered, defiant, was more terrifying than anything she had ever faced. In the darkness, her hands burned faintly, blue and trembling, the power within her stirring, whispering promises she could not yet understand. And she waited, suspended between fear and the unknown, knowing that when the world returned, nothing would ever be the same again. The castle was a labyrinth of stone and shadow, a place where power breathed from every corner and walls whispered secrets older than the world outside. For Lira, it was a prison and a marvel all at once. The towering halls loomed above her, ceilings arched like the ribs of some ancient beast, torches flickering along the corridors, casting dancing shadows that seemed alive. Every step she took echoed through the stone, a small, fragile sound swallowed by the enormity of the place. The rules were unyielding. Omegas were not to meet the gaze of an alpha, not even their eyes, but hers had already met Ethan's once, and the memory of that sharp, burning connection lingered, haunting her. She had been assigned silent duties, sweeping, polishing, arranging, cleaning, tasks meant to keep her visible yet invisible at the same time. She moved quickly, silently, knowing that any misstep could mean punishment, humiliation, or worse. The hierarchy pressed down on her like the weight of the stone walls themselves. Guards passed with purpose, shoulders squared, eyes calculating, always searching for weakness. Servants whispered, sometimes venomously, when she passed. Some spat on the floor she was meant to clean, a cruel reminder that her existence was tolerated only insofar as it served the needs of the powerful. Yet behind that relentless cruelty, something extraordinary stirred. Late one evening, after the public chores had ended, after she had scrubbed floors until her hands bled and her knees ached, a soft knock at the chamber door startled her. She froze, mop in hand. The heavy, commanding voice of the Alpha himself carried through the doorway. "Lira, come here." The words were simple, yet they carried gravity, a pull she could not resist. She swallowed, heart hammering, and approached, careful to keep her gaze low, to obey the silent rules, to be nothing. The door creaked as she entered, and the scent of him hit her first, metallic, sharp, tinged with the faintest trace of something alive and dangerous. The poison had weakened him, yet it had not diminished the power that radiated from his presence. He was lying on a high bed, sheets pulled tight, his body frail but his eyes still burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. She could feel it, the pulse of life, the beat of pain in his veins. Her hands tingled, the faint blue glow surging with instinct, whispering that she could reach in, could draw away the agony, could ease the suffering if only she dared. Their conversation was terse at first, words clipped, measured, the air thick with tension. He tested her carefully, questioning her presence, her loyalty, her understanding of the castle's unspoken rules. She responded quietly, carefully, each word chosen to please, to avoid offense, to survive. And yet beneath the tension, beneath the walls of power and fear, a subtle current flowed, a silent electricity that neither could name. He noticed it too. His wolf, always restless, always aggressive, always loud in his presence, remained unervingly calm when she was near. And she, the wolfless Omega, felt his pain like her own, every cough, every twitch of muscle, every labored breath sending a ripple through her body, drawing her closer despite every instinct to flee. Days passed in this strange rhythm. Publicly, she remained invisible, the shadow girl, the beggar maid-servant. Guards would trip her, spill water, demand she repeat tasks until her fingers were raw and her body shook with exhaustion. Servants whispered insults, mocked her quietly behind the closed doors of kitchens and hallways. Every day reminded her of her place, low, unimportant, unwanted. Yet privately, in the quiet corners of Ethan's chamber, a different world existed. He began to request her presence, not out of duty, not out of politeness, but necessity. She sensed the poison coursing through his bloodstream, the weakening of his body, the desperation masked by his authority. She could not turn away, could not leave him to his suffering, and slowly, imperceptibly, the tension between them shifted. Words became lighter, pauses longer, glances lingering despite the rules. Every conversation, every shared silence, carried an unspoken question. Why does your presence ease the chaos inside me? Lira wondered the same about him. Why did she feel the ache of his suffering as though it were her own? Why did her pulse synchronize with his, her breathing slow when he exhaled? She had always been alone, had always moved like a shadow in the margins of the world. And yet here in the poison-scented chamber of a dying Alpha King, she felt connected, needed, alive. Night in the castle was a living thing. The halls groaned as the wind shook the ancient stones, and shadows moved with the flicker of torchlight. Lira had been cleaning Ethan's chambers quietly, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on the floor, when exhaustion and loneliness overcame her. She crouched beside the rug, shoulders shaking, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. For a moment she allowed herself the truth she had long buried, that she was alone, utterly, painfully alone, that the world had never wanted her, and that her life had been nothing but shadows. She did not hear him enter at first, but the soft echo of boots across stone alerted her. She froze, hoping to remain unseen, afraid to be discovered in this vulnerable state. A hand rested lightly on the back of her shoulder, and the voice she had learned to fear softened, cracked in a way she had never heard before. "Who hurt you?" he asked. No accusation. No command. Only curiosity, concern, the faintest tremor of vulnerability in the words. She flinched but could not hide. She bowed her head, her voice breaking, trembling like dry leaves in the wind. I am wolfless. Worthless. Abandoned. No one has ever cared." The confession tumbled out like water breaking through a dam, and she found herself speaking truths she had never dared voice, not even in the quiet of her own mind. He listened. Truly listened. And then for the first time he revealed a sliver of his own wound, a crack in the armor of the Alpha King. "Power means nothing," he whispered, voice low, "when death sits on your bed every night, when you breathe and hope and pray that it won't take the ones you love, or even yourself." The words struck her, reverberating through the hollow places of her heart. Here was a man the world feared, a man who commanded armies, a man whose very presence could shatter cities. And yet, like her, he carried wounds invisible to everyone else. They saw his authority, his strength, his titles, but not the fear, the helplessness, the pain that coursed like fire through his veins. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the soft patter of rain against the chamber windows filled the room, mingling with their breathing, their quiet heartbeat of shared understanding. In that silence they recognized each other, not as Alpha and Omega, not as king and servant, not as powerful and powerless, but as two wounded souls who had survived too long in a world that refused to see them. And in that recognition a bridge was built. Small, fragile, trembling, yet unbreakable in its truth. They were more than titles. More than bloodlines. More than expectation. In that moment they were simply human, vulnerable, aching, alive. The storm outside intensified, wind rattling the shutters, lightning illuminating the chamber in sharp, fleeting bursts. She looked at him, the glow of her hands dim, pulse still thrumming with her unspoken gift. And he looked at her, eyes softened by understanding, by shared pain, by the unspoken acknowledgement that something dangerous, beautiful, and impossible was beginning to form. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Connection was not built on conversation alone but on the weight of shared wounds, mirrored loneliness, and the quiet acceptance that they were no longer alone. And so, in the dim light of a poisoned king's chamber, the wolfless Omega and the powerful Alpha found the first flicker of something they could not name. Something that would pull them together against rules, against fear, against the world itself. Night fell over the northern castle like a velvet shroud, heavy and encompassing, and with it came a quiet ritual that had begun to define the rhythm of Lyra's days. She moved through the halls carefully, mop abandoned for the moment, her hands trembling slightly, glowing faintly in the dim torchlight. She carried a small bowl of herbs, crushed and mixed with care, their scent earthy and sharp, a perfume meant to soothe and strengthen. Ethan lay upon his bed, weakened by the poison, body taut and trembling as his wolf growled softly in protest of the ache coursing through his veins. The moment she entered, the air seemed to shift. Guards stationed nearby gave a wide berth, as though sensing that whatever passed between them here was sacred, untouchable. "Sit," he said, voice rough but insistent, and Lira obeyed without hesitation, kneeling beside the bed. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared he could hear it. She placed the bowl gently on the low table and then, almost unconsciously, her hands hovered over him. The blue glow beneath her skin flared slightly, warm and trembling, as if reacting to the very essence of his suffering. The first touch was tentative. Fingers brushing against skin that was pale, fragile, yet taut with the remnants of alpha strength. Pain left him in waves, drawn out gently by her subtle, silent power. He hissed softly, a mix of relief and disbelief. The wolf inside him quivered, unsettled by the quiet intimacy that dared to exist between them. Candlelight flickered, shadows dancing across the walls, making the chamber seem both larger and smaller at once. Outside, the distant howls of the pack echoed through the night, a wild symphony of life and threat that made the castle feel simultaneously alive and dangerous. Lyra's cheeks flushed as she felt the warmth of him near her, the rise and fall of his chest beneath her fingers, the subtle tremor in his hands that betrayed both pain and the faintest spark of anticipation. And slowly, impossibly, the ritual became more than healing. It became a conversation without words, an exchange of trust and presence. She could feel him relax slightly under her touch, his breathing evening, his body less rigid, less burdened. And she felt alive. The exhaustion of her past, the constant fear, the hunger and rejection, seemed to fade for a few stolen hours each night. Here by his side she had a purpose beyond survival. Time lost its meaning in the quiet. Minutes stretched into hours as fingers brushed, hands hovered, and the room was filled with the soft hiss of herbs burning in a small brazier. Her glowing hands pulsed faintly as they hovered over bruised muscles, over aching joints, over the subtle tremor of someone clinging to life. Every pulse seemed to echo back into her own body, filling her with warmth, with urgency, with something that felt dangerously like connection. Ethan's eyes often followed her, unspoken questions simmering in their depths. He never reached for her directly, never commanded her attention, but his gaze lingered, softening around the edges with a mixture of curiosity, awe, and something far more difficult to name. Her pulse jumped each time, her cheeks burning under the intensity of being seen, of being acknowledged, of being chosen for this fragile, secret, sacred act. The nights repeated. Each evening the ritual grew steadier, more intimate, more electric. Words remained scarce, unnecessary at first. A brush of hands, a shared silence, the exchange of breath and presence sufficed. The poison remained, gnawing at Ethan's strength, yet it no longer dictated the entirety of the night. She brought warmth, presence, and something entirely unexpected, comfort. And in return he offered the rarest thing in the castle, his quiet trust. By the time the candles burned low and the first pale light of dawn crept across the chamber, the bond between them had deepened. It was subtle, silent, almost invisible to any observer, yet unshakable in its effect. He slept easier. She felt steadier. And beneath the surface, unspoken, was the undeniable pull of something neither had yet named, but both could feel. The beginning of a bond that would alter the course of their lives entirely. The morning after one particularly long night, Ethan summoned her with a tone that brooked no argument, yet carried none of the coldness the castle staff had come to expect. She entered cautiously, hands still faintly glowing from the previous night's ritual, and found him waiting not in his bed but in the chamber doorway, posture rigid yet uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I've arranged something for you," he said, voice low, carefully measured. There was no command in it, no power wielded to force her to obey. It was deliberate, considerate, a subtle shift that made Lyra's heart catch in her chest. A warm room awaited her, modest yet impossibly more comfortable than anything she had ever known. Soft blankets, a small hearth, and a table where she could study, write, or simply sit in quiet were arranged just for her. Clothes of fine but practical fabric hung neatly, an unspoken declaration that she belonged, at least here, at least in part, to someone who saw her. And perhaps most shockingly, he granted her access to the library, books lining walls that reached for the ceiling, filled with knowledge, stories, power, and secrets that had been forbidden to her all her life. Here she could speak freely, sit where she pleased, ask questions, and even, occasionally, answer when he spoke without fear of scorn or punishment. For the first time in her 19 years, someone had looked at her and said without words, without caveat, "I see you." It was heavier than any stone she had ever lifted. He had no idea perhaps how deeply this simple act would resonate, how it would settle in the hollow spaces of her heart that had never known acknowledgement. She had been a shadow, a whisper, a ghost drifting through alleys, scraping together scraps of survival. And now she had a place. A literal room, yes, but more than that. A foothold in a world that had long denied her existence. Ethan watched her reaction carefully. He did not speak immediately, letting the silence stretch, letting her absorb the magnitude of what had been given. And in that quiet, Lira realized something profound. This was no ordinary gift. It was a statement. Not of obligation. Not of mercy. Not even of pity. But of recognition. "I see you," she whispered under her breath, echoing the sentiment, feeling its weight sink into her chest like sunlight through winter clouds. Her hands, once constantly trembling and glowing in secret, felt steadier. Her pulse, once jittering with fear at every glance, now carried a quiet rhythm that matched the unspoken trust between them. And Ethan, he softened just slightly, the edges of the king and the poison-fueled warrior blurring, leaving a man capable of acknowledging someone as fragile and overlooked as she was. His eyes lingered on her, faintly puzzled, faintly intrigued, and entirely captivated by the subtle wonder of the wolfless Omega before him. This was more than a room, more than clothes, more than access to forbidden knowledge. It was a declaration that even in a world structured by power, by hierarchy, by blood and teeth and strength, there was space for connection, for acknowledgement, for quiet reverence. And in that moment, Lira allowed herself a small, trembling hope. The kind of hope that she had never let herself nurture before. The kind that whispered, maybe, just maybe, the world could hold more for her than survival, more than shadows, more than being invisible. Maybe it could hold recognition, care, even love. The candlelight flickered across the walls of her new room. Outside, the distant howls of the pack reminded her of the danger that still lingered, of the poison that threatened Ethan's life. But inside, a fragile sanctuary had formed, a bond solidifying between healer and alpha, wolfless and king, shadow and flame. And in that bond, the first tendrils of something impossible, intoxicating and utterly transformative began to coil. Lira woke that morning to a silence that felt heavier than the night itself. The castle's corridors were empty, but the weight inside her chest made every breath feel labored. She had touched him last night, his hand trembling under hers, his wolf purring softly in acknowledgement, and something in her shifted. Something undeniable, terrifying, beautiful. She whispered the truth to herself for the first time. I care about him. It was terrifying. She had always survived by detachment, by invisibility, by pretending that the world's cruelty didn't matter. But now her heart screamed at her, demanded her attention, refused to be silenced. She couldn't imagine him sick, weak, or, heaven forbid, dead. The thought of losing him, of watching him fade while she could do nothing, sent tremors through her very soul. I don't want him to die. She remembered the nights spent kneeling beside his bed, her hands glowing faintly blue, her breath synchronized with his, feeling his pain as if it were her own. She remembered the rare moments he had softened, the way his eyes lingered, the way his voice had cracked that night when he asked who hurt her. And suddenly she knew she didn't just want to stay, she had to. I want to stay by his side. The words felt like a confession she had no right to make. An Omega? A wolfless girl, she had once believed herself invisible, worthless. She dared not hope that an alpha could care for her. Yet here she was, trembling with the magnitude of what she felt, and knowing with terrifying certainty that the pull between them was no longer subtle, no longer ignorable. And then, as if reading the change in the air, Ethan stirred. His eyes opened, sharp despite the lingering haze of pain and poison, and for the first time, Lira noticed the shift in him. He wasn't just a king lying weak upon his bed. He was a man aware of her presence, aware of the protective urge swelling inside him. His gaze softened when it fell upon her, careful and deliberate, the faintest quiver betraying the emotional line he had always kept taut. Something unspoken passed between them in that instant. A recognition of need and attachment that neither dared voice. His hand twitched as if reaching for her, and she felt her pulse spike, her own body reacting with the warmth of closeness, the terror of attachment, and the helplessness of love that could not yet be declared. The morning light crept into the chamber, pale and cold against the stone walls, illuminating the truth neither could deny. In the quiet, in the space between heartbeats, love settled over them like an invisible cloak. Impossible, dangerous, undeniable. The revelation came like a thunderclap. Lira had been tending to him as usual, drawing the dull ache from his veins, letting her hands glow faintly, when a whisper in the back of her mind surged into clarity. Her mother's warnings, fragments of stories she had been too young to understand, came rushing back. Secrets buried beneath years of pain, fear, and survival now emerged in sharp crystalline detail. She was not wolfless. The truth made her knees buckle and her hands tremble as if she had touched fire. Buried deep within her blood was a forbidden healing wolf, sealed at birth. Her mother had been hunted, tormented, and eventually killed for the same gift. And now her blood was the only thing that could save Ethan. The Alpha King, the man she loved, the one who had begun to see her as more than shadow, he could only survive because of her. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Politics would be shaken. Alliances would crumble. Prophecies long forgotten whispered in the dark. If this secret was revealed, her life, her freedom, even the fragile bond she had built with Ethan could shatter. The world she had barely survived would no longer tolerate her presence. Her chest tightened as the weight of it pressed down. How could she face him knowing the truth? How could she watch the man she loved suffer without exposing herself to danger? The room felt smaller, the candlelight flickering violently against stone walls, as if the shadows themselves sensed the storm that had arrived. And yet she could not hide it. He would see it in her eyes, the fear, the desperation, the truth too large for words. And when she finally spoke, it was not in accusation or demand, but in trembling, raw honesty. I have the power to save you. But it comes at a price. My blood. It's the only cure. Ethan's eyes widened, shock rippling across his features, followed by a flash of something darker. Fear, comprehension, awe, and the instinctive calculation of a wolf sensing the gravity of the hunt. The room seemed to constrict, walls pressing closer, the air thick with unspoken consequences. The bond between them fractured in that instant, delicate threads of trust and intimacy stretched too far by the weight of truth. The closeness they had nurtured, the silent nights, the shared vulnerabilities, suddenly carried a burden neither could have anticipated. Love, in its rawest, most terrifying form, collided headlong with the dangers of destiny, politics, and prophecy. The words came like knives wrapped in silk. "You must leave," Ethan said, voice calm but rigid, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. "For your safety. For mine." Her heart stuttered, shattered against her ribs. "Leave? He raised a hand and she froze. His wolf growled softly beneath the surface, a low, warning rumble, yet his expression softened just enough to tell her this was not a command given lightly. "You mean nothing to me," he said, the lie spilling effortlessly from his lips, wrapped in authority meant to protect her. "Go back to where you belong." The words struck her like a hammer, each syllable tearing at her soul. She had finally found a place where she mattered, finally touched a life worth holding, and now, she had to relinquish it. She broke down in quiet, helpless sobs, her body trembling from the weight of love, fear, and betrayal layered into one unbearable moment. But she obeyed. Every step away from the castle was agony. Every corridor she passed, every echoing footstep in the halls where he had lain sick, every glance at the windows where moonlight had once illuminated their shared nights, tore at her from the inside. The guards led her out, the rain soaking through her thin cloak, as if the heavens themselves mourned her exile. Returning to the streets she had once called home, she was no longer the same shadow girl who had scuttled beneath bridges and scavenged scraps. She had glimpsed the warmth of recognition, of trust, of love. And now, stripped of that fragile sanctuary, the world that had always rejected her seemed colder, darker, and infinitely more hostile. Children spat, pack members sneered, and the familiar shoves and insults rang sharper than ever. But inside, her heart carried a memory, an ember that refused to be extinguished. She had loved, had been seen, had been chosen, even if only briefly. And though her hands now trembled with exhaustion, fear, and heartbreak, her mind clung to the faintest thread of hope. That this was not the end, that their bond had left its mark, indelible and impossible to erase. For the first time she understood the depth of the price of love. And for the first time she vowed silently, though her body obeyed orders and retreated, she would not abandon him entirely. Somehow, someway she would find her path back. The Northern Castle's grand ceremony was meant to celebrate alliances, to display power and to honor tradition. But from the first moment an undercurrent of tension hummed beneath the ornate banners and polished marble floors. The court gathered, nobles and alpha delegates from surrounding territories filling the hall, their eyes sharp, their whispers sharper. Lyra's heart pounded from the streets outside, soaked in rain, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Rumors of Ethan's declining health had reached her through whispers and panic-stricken servants. Something in her chest screamed, "He won't survive the ceremony unless I act." Inside the hall, chaos erupted like fire through dry grass. A rival faction of alphas and rogue omegas, those who despised Ethan and coveted power, struck without warning. Gold and silver banners swirled as guards and intruders clashed, shouts echoing against stone walls. Torches flickered, smoke curling into the rafters. And then she saw him. Ethan, crumpled against the dais, his chest heaving, hands shaking, blood on his lips. The poison had overtaken him more quickly than she had feared. The court's whispers rose into a roar and she felt the world blur around her. Time slowed, each second stretched into an eternity. She ran, ignoring the wet stone under her feet, ignoring the shouted orders, ignoring the guards who tried to stop her. She ran because every heartbeat screamed his name. Every memory of nights spent kneeling beside his bed, feeling the poison, feeling him, demanded she act. When she reached him, the crowd parted like a tide against her resolve. Eyes widened, jaws slackened, and the hall fell into a hush that pressed down on her chest. The Omega girl, drenched and trembling, had returned. Not a shadow, not a whisper, but a force of desperate, blazing will. "Step aside," she shouted, voice raw, unyielding, echoing across the hall. Guards hesitated, unsure. Ethan's gaze, barely aware, flickered toward her. His wolf rumbled inside him, a low, questioning growl. And then, faintly, almost like a command whispered from another realm, he said, "Let her." The words broke into chaos again as the intruders faltered, distracted by the intensity radiating from the small, soaked Omega kneeling beside the dying king. She knelt at his side, hands glowing, shaking, heart in her throat. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Let me save you, Ethan. Please. I can cure this. But it might kill me." The hall fell into stunned silence. Nobles, guards, and enemies alike froze, unsure what to do. Her glow pulsed faintly, blue and luminous, as though her very soul was extending toward him. Ethan's eyes met hers, fierce and blazing despite weakness. He was at the precipice, trapped between duty and instinct, between power and desire, between ego and the heart that had never stopped reaching for her. The poison clawed at him, stealing strength, and yet he paused, studying her, feeling the bond they had formed in the dark nights, in the rituals, in the quiet, fleeting moments that had once seemed impossible. "Power," his voice rasped. It could. "Love," she whispered, voice raw, hand hovering above his trembling form. "Choose love. Let me save you." A heartbeat stretched into eternity. Then he reached for her, a decision made not in logic, not in strategy, but in the pure, dangerous truth of his heart. "Love," he whispered back, and the choice shattered the room. She acted without hesitation. The pain of giving, the risk of sharing her life, surged through her. Her hands pressed against him, glowing brighter, veins faintly visible under her skin as the liquid, luminous blood surged from her to him. Her knees buckled, her vision swirled, the world tilting and darkening as every ounce of her strength poured into the man she loved. The cure was as deadly as it was miraculous. She felt her own life teetering on the edge, body screaming, lungs burning, but her heart anchored in the one thought that had carried her through every night of fear, of hunger, of rejection. He must live. Then, darkness. When she awoke, it was to the sound of low growls, deep and resonant, filling the chamber. Light filtered in through broken windows, catching the edges of stone and banner alike. Her hands were empty, trembling, but she felt it, power coursing through her veins, wild and free. Ethan lay beside her, breathing deep and steady, chest rising with strength she had feared gone forever. His eyes opened, gold flecks glittering, wolf roaring inside him like a banner claiming the night. He moved, fluid and commanding, alive in a way that made her chest ache with relief and awe. And then she realized. Her own sealed wolf, hidden, forbidden, locked away by a cruel fate, was free. Blue flames of power pulsed beneath her skin, her senses sharper, her body stronger. She was no longer the fragile, wolfless Omega of yesterday. She was whole. They stared at each other, unspoken understanding flowing between them. Life, death, fear, love, all transformed in the span of a single night. They had faced poison, betrayal, politics, and destiny itself, and had emerged not only alive but changed, bound by a force deeper than blood, deeper than ritual, deeper than law. For a long moment, they simply breathed together, bodies tense, hearts synchronized, wolf and omega and king entwined in unbroken harmony. The castle outside still hummed with chaos, but inside this chamber the storm had passed, leaving clarity raw and unshakable. Finally, words, trembling and soft, spilled into the silence. "I love you," Ethan whispered, voice hoarse but steady. "I choose you. Come home to me." Tears burned in her eyes, cheeks flushing, heart surging with a release she had never dared imagine. She reached out, fingertips brushing his, glowing faintly in the morning light. "I saw you before anyone else did," she murmured, voice breaking, the weight of every stolen, painful, intimate moment pouring into that single truth. And then their lips met. Gentle at first, tentative, exploring, tasting, memorizing. The kiss deepened, urgent, desperate, claiming, sealing the bond that had survived poison, exile, fear, and forbidden secrets. Around them, the world may have still reeled from chaos, enemies may have lurked, and danger may have lingered at the edges. But in that room, in that moment, there was only them. Alpha and Omega, healer and king, shadow and light, finally, irrevocably, together. And in the aftermath, the castle, the court, the pack, all would come to know that nothing, not poison, not politics, not fear, could undo the force of love that had been forged in fire, pain, and devotion. Welcome to Anne's Romance Collections, where every story is crafted to break your heart, heal your soul, and keep you hooked till the last breath. The sun rose over the northern kingdom, gilding the castle towers with gold, spilling light into corridors that had once known fear and whispered secrets. Outside, the pack stirred with a sense of cautious hope, for the world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Omegas who had once been shadows now walked openly, heads held high, voices no longer silenced by fear or tradition. Lira, once a beggar girl, now moved through the castle halls with quiet authority. Her presence commanded respect, but more than that, it radiated hope. Ethan stood beside her, eyes scanning the transformed court, his hand brushing hers in quiet solidarity. Laws that had oppressed generations were rewritten. Healers now trained openly, their gifts celebrated rather than feared. Lira's contributions were recognized as extraordinary, life-saving, and sacred. She had changed the rules of the world and in doing so rewritten the destiny of those who had been forgotten. The kingdom responded. Where fear and hierarchy had reigned, respect and equity now took root. Children who had once scorned Omegas now watched them with curiosity, learning that strength could manifest in forms unseen. Former enemies softened, realizing that loyalty and honor were more powerful than tradition alone. And through it all, Lira felt the quiet satisfaction of transformation. She was no longer a shadow, she was a force, a healer, a bridge between worlds torn apart by prejudice and fear. The memory of her first night, shivering beneath the bridge, seemed like a distant dream. She had survived rejection, humiliation, and exile, and now presided over a new dawn. Lira's rise to queen was neither sudden nor shallow. It was earned in blood, courage, and nights spent at the bedside of a dying alpha who had become more than her king. He was her anchor, her mirror, the heartbeat that had called her forward when she thought she had none. Her wolf spirit, now free, pulsed in tandem with the kingdom's rhythm. Where she walked, flowers seemed brighter, the air warmer, even the cold stone of the castle softened. Her subjects looked at her not with fear but with admiration, for she had proven that true power lies not in domination but in courage, compassion, and the unbreakable will to protect those you love. Ethan's court adjusted quickly to the new reality. Former skeptics bowed not merely in tradition but with respect, recognizing the courage that had flowed from the Omega who had saved their alpha. Lira's influence was gentle yet undeniable. She brought healing not just to bodies, but to hearts scarred by fear and bitterness. Celebrations erupted across the territory. Feasts were laid in the central plaza, music echoing through streets that had once known whispers and shadows. Pack unity strengthened. Disputes resolved quickly, old grudges softened. And if one listened closely, a quiet promise stirred between Lira and Ethan. A hint of future life, a hint of legacy yet to come. Amidst it all, Lira felt the fullness of her journey. Pain transformed into purpose, rejection into recognition, love into something eternal. She had survived every trial and emerged whole, her spirit blazing, her heart tethered irrevocably to Ethan, her wolf now inseparable from her soul. Evening fell, a gentle golden haze spilling over the castle grounds. Lira stood at the balcony, wind tugging at her hair, wolf spirit a comforting hum beneath her skin. She closed her eyes and remembered her first night at the castle, shivering, invisible, whispering to the darkness. Nobody sees the forgotten. Ethan came to her side silently, his presence a warm, solid anchor. His hand found hers, thumb brushing over her knuckles, steady and unflinching. He leaned close, voice soft yet carrying the weight of every shared trial, every moment of pain and triumph. Not anymore. Not while I live. The simplicity of the words, the raw honesty, made her chest tighten with relief and awe. She had been invisible, underestimated and dismissed, but now in this quiet moment, everything had shifted. The kingdom, the pack, the world itself would remember the girl who had healed not just a dying alpha but a wounded society. They shared a long, gentle embrace, wolf and human, omega and alpha, healer and king, bound not by duty, but by the irrevocable force of love that had survived darkness and despair. Around them, the kingdom settled, the pack resting, winds whispered promises of peace, unity and enduring hope. And as night deepened, Lira felt it in her bones. The journey was complete. Hearts had been broken, souls had been healed, and love had triumphed in a way that would echo through time. Welcome to Anne's Romance Collections, where every story is crafted to break your heart, heal your soul, and keep you hooked till the last breath.